It's been a year since Russia invaded Ukraine, a moment that looms large even today and threatens to change the world order. Within that, it also threatens to reshape the sporting universe. 30 countries at last count have written to the International Olympic Committee urging them not to include Russia and its ally Belarus at next year's Paris Olympics. The IOC has argued that it's not the country but its athletes who could be given a chance, underlining that they will take part as neutrals and not compete in Russia's name or colors. However, will that trigger a mass boycott of the Olympics, like we are witnessing at the Women's Boxing World Championships that's scheduled to be held in Delhi next month? And how will, amidst all this, the idea of Russia competing in Asia at the Asian Games later this year phase out? Well, we don't have an answer to all those questions, but what we certainly can gauge is the impact of all this geopoliticking in the sporting world. You're listening to Game Time with me, Mihir Vasavda, and we'll try to break all this down with Amit Kamath, who makes his Game Time debut. Amit, this is a sporting crisis. This is something that has, I don't know, Cold War ke instances ke time ka thoda, if those references make sense, but it just feels like that, right? I mean, we grew up hearing stories about the late 70s, early 80s, जहाँ पर Olympics हमेशा boycott होते थे, either the quote-unquote democratic world led by the US and quote-unquote communist world led by Russia. And all these years later, we've come a full circle, and again, गाड़ी वहीं आकर अटक गई है. How do you see this entire thing, panning out?
Mir, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a great thing for me to make my debut today, and a great topic for me to talk about. As far as these boycotts are concerned, sure, it's a very it's probably the biggest crisis in terms of sport itself. But then, if you look at it, just look at Tokyo, for example. We were one athlete sneezing, one athlete contracting a high fever away from the games completely being called off, deferred for one more year, God knows what. So I think for the Olympics movement, the IOC would not like to host an Olympics where there is no drama preceding the games. I think they will find themselves in a place where, they don't know what to do if the games are not running in some kind of, an issue. If there are no cost overruns, if there is no corruption, if there is no, delays in the stadiums, things like that. Zika virus of all things, the pandemic coming in, which is something that had not happened for 100 years. So drama is what I think the IOC kind of thrives on now because it's used to that. So this, I'm sure, somehow eventually it is going to work out. That's my feeling because the IOC also does hire a lot of consultants to kind of help them with diplomacy, geopolitics, things like that.
I mean, that whole narrative na कि Olympics are too big to fall, too big to fail, वो तो कैसे बना रहेगा अगर जो IOC इतना easily give up कर देगा और Olympics अगर जो सीधे साधे तरीके से हो जाता है. But this time, I don't know, it feels a little different to me. You sound very confident. I think we're 16, 17 months down the line from the Paris Olympics. They're supposed to be held July next year. So, well, let's all do our math. I mean, battle lines जो इस बार है वो काफी clear cut divided. It's not as simple as say the Western world versus I don't know what the other half should be called. But the 30 countries that we mentioned, it of course has countries like the US, UK. It has the host nation France as well included in it. Then you've got countries from Asia, South Korea, Japan, who are signing that thing. So एक तरीके से battle lines are divided, which makes it a little more intriguing. India hasn't really cleared its position where it stands in this thing, but well, I don't think in the overall Olympic scheme of things, India kahan par aata hai. But just that bit looks a little jarring to me, and that's why it just I sit back and think, yaar, ye kaun sa direction mein ja raha hai? You sound very confident on the other hand.
I think as far as India is concerned, I think they've just gone back to the non-aligned movement where it's decided that the two factions want to fight it out. Fine, we don't have a horse in this race. So we are not going to get involved.
इंडिया इज काउंटिंग कि उन्हें गोल्ड मेडल्स कहाँ पर मिल सकते हैं.
Absolutely. Hopefully. But the other thing also is that even if you look at the IOC or even, as you mentioned, France has sided with the 30 countries, a lot of opinion, a lot of stances here are fluid. If you look at just the Paris mayor, and she initially had said that Russians and Belarusians are okay to compete. They should be allowed to compete. Now suddenly she's had a rethink over that and said that we don't want Russians or Belarusians until the war stops. The IOC itself has had an about face over the last few months. So it's very fluid. In the next 16 months, and 16 months is a long time in international sport. It's a long time in geopolitics for things to change, things to completely evolve. So I have a feeling that, yeah, things are tricky right now, but then 16 months down the line, who knows if this is even a non-issue.
Yeah, I mean, it could well be a non-issue 16 months down the line, but it also feels a bit weird because as we saw during the Tokyo Olympics as well, कि काफी कुछ चीजें individually ठीक ठाक चल रही थी apart from the Olympics. I mean, we both went to the Tokyo Olympics and हमने काफी closely देखा था कि क्या चल रहा था वहाँ. And we saw, for example, was it the baseball games in Tokyo that were going on beforehand, just before the Olympics took place? No one bothered about that. But Olympics की बात कर रहे थे तो people just got, I don't know, थोड़ा सदमा सा होने लग गया था. And this time you also have a similar situation where you have got Russian athletes participating in other sports. I mean, the best example here is Daniil Medvedev in tennis. He's going around playing in every country. He will be going to Paris in a couple of months and playing in the French Open, which is, I think, the same venue which will be hosting Olympics tennis as well. तो वो एक double standards थोड़ा सा, I mean, I find it confusing. And I guess ये contradictions और ज़्यादा दिखने लगेंगे as the days pass by, as the Olympics get closer.
I think, when you talk about the contradictions, when you look at why a lot of these Western countries have a problem, obviously we know that it's been almost a year that the Russian army has invaded into Ukraine, which is why the whole problem is. But if you just look at the stats, athletes have always been backed by the military of the country. If you look at Russia, for example, I'll just look at a few stats that I had found on, the International Military Sports Council, which organizes the World Military Games. They said that almost 1/3 of the athletes from Russia who were at Tokyo Olympics were backed by the Central Sport Club of the Army. Just to illustrate, just to give one example, Bhavani Devi, the event that she was participating in, saber fencing, women's saber fencing, the women who won gold and silver in that were both Russians. Both of them were backed by the Russian army. So now, obviously, that is where the whole neutrality thing kind of falls into because even if an athlete is not competing under the flag or the Russian national anthem does not play, eventually at the end of the day, maybe that athlete has been backed by the Russian army in terms of funding. So that is where the problem maybe arises. Obviously, I know you have a very different take to this whole hypocrisy.
No, not actually. Now, when you put it like this, I think हमने पहले भी when we had discussed this, I spoken about hypocrisy and you brought this point forward. But then you understand, right? You kind of get it why there's this clamor to have Russian athletes banned. I mean, हम whataboutery में घुस जाते हैं and we say कि XYZ country has invaded XYZ country and हम क्यों उसे ban नहीं कर रहे हैं, right? But then I don't think their athletes are backed in such a way by the country's army. Is that the case, or do you think her country की army in one way or the other backs their athletes and then everything kind of सब फिटूस हो जाता है वहाँ पर?
I think, obviously a lot of countries have their own ways. Americans, I don't think the American army backs a lot of these athletes personally. They are all because the birthplace of capitalism, in a way, America. So the army they don't get a lot of funding from their government. All of them have to mostly get their own funding, or they will have high performance training centers where they can, kind of train. But the Russians are particularly proud of the fact that their army, in fact, I was reading up a list on their defense ministry's website where they say that they've backed athletes which have won them 1086 medals at the Olympics in the past, including 475 gold medals. So that kind of gives you a little bit of perspective how proud the Russian army is of the fact that the athletes that they've backed are going into the Olympics winning the medals. So that is a little bit of a just to give you an insight into how much, what is at play here, what is the issue here.
I get that. The hypocrisy bit, which I was talking about earlier, not as much as today, is कि IOC is basically saying कि हम ये नहीं कह रहे कि सारे athletes को हम invite करेंगे रशिया के. We will clearly monitor, look at athletes who haven't either backed or actively participated in the war, and then we'll call those athletes. And as neutrals, they'll participate, which essentially means कि they won't be wearing Russian colors, there won't be Russian anthem played, the Russian flag won't be displayed, Russian government officials won't be invited to the Olympics. All those things, of course, will follow. Per se, I mean, I really haven't sat and thought about this as much as I should have, but on the face value, I don't see उसमें गलत क्या है. Because for the simple reason कि if the government start dictating to the IOC कि कौन से countries को आपको allow करना है, कौन से countries को नहीं करना है, then we'll enter a territory जहाँ पर
where does it stop?
Where does it stop?
Yeah.
Exactly, right?
Like there'll be basically tit for tat. As you said, the 1970s and the 80s were all about boycotting Moscow Olympics. I think we came very close to winning a bunch of medals because a lot of these countries had basically said we are not coming to Moscow to compete at the games because Russia is hosting it. So I understand that. And when you talk about hypocrisy, my favorite bit about this is the IOC's hypocrisy itself. On one side, they desperately want to be seen as a peacemaker. They desperately want to be seen as a force for peace. On the other hand, they don't want to be seen as taking a stance on war itself. So they want to completely distance themselves from war, but also say that, we are peaceniks. So that is a little bit of for me, I mean, I don't know, you might disagree.
Right. The only angle, right? It's what the IOC president has been, I mean, the joke within the sporting circle is that the IOC president has been angling for a Nobel Peace Prize for ages. And certainly this isn't helping his case right now.
Absolutely. In fact, Thomas Bach went in recently when he was asked about his stance for trying to allow or opening the back gate for Russian and Belarusian athletes to come and compete. One of the things he said was, history will show who is doing more for peace, the ones who try and keep lines open to communicate, or the ones who want to isolate and divide. For the
Very bad Thomas Bach mimic, by the way.
I wasn't trying to mimic, but the point is that Mr. Bach obviously forgets the fact that, I don't think these 30 nations are trying to divide. It's that one nation has basically invaded the other nation, which is the root of the problem. So maybe that is the problem that you should be trying to address, rather than if you want to get into all of the geopolitics, or you can basically say that, we are not getting involved in this at all. So on the one hand, you can't be trying to get North Korea and South Korea to put, I don't know, decades of ill will behind them and, send joint teams to the Olympics. On the other hand, say that, we are completely neutral. I think that is, Mihir, also what the 30 countries are saying. Can you please define neutrality? Where does your neutrality stop and what are the limits of your neutrality?
Yeah, basically, I just hope it's not a united Russian and Ukrainian team that IOC is expecting. But where does all this...
It would be audacious. It would be fun if they even tried to do that.
I mean, yeah, I can't think of such a scenario. Ki kya hoga if they even consider this idea of a Russian-Ukrainian joint team like they did with the South and North Korean teams. But on a more serious note, we are seeing what the fallout rather of this could be. I mean, an example of whatever is happening in world sport right now is kind of seen in boxing. जहाँ पर, just to sum up the whole controversy in a nutshell before we kind of हमारा हम ज्ञान उस पे बांटे, तो उसमें हुआ ये है कि द इंटरनेशनल बॉक्सिंग फेडरेशन एसोसिएशन had been under scanner for almost 7 years since the Rio Olympics, जहाँ पर मैच फिक्सिंग स्कैंडल्स बाहर निकले थे. Then there was this whole drive to reform the organization, और उस रिफॉर्म का आउटकम ये हुआ कि there was this Russian guy who was elected as the president. Now, after the war broke out, people started to realize that this Russian guy was a close ally of, allegedly a close ally of Vladimir Putin. It also then turned out that the International Boxing Association ka sole sponsor right now is Gazprom, which is again a Russian state agency. To make matters worse, the Boxing Federation ka headquarters was then shifted from Lausanne to Moscow, which further muddled waters. And now it's become a us versus them thing where the Western world wants the IBA, that's the International Boxing Association, either to be completely dissolved or to mend its ways, which isn't clear how that will happen. So, iska consequence ye hua hai ki the IOC is saying कि Olympics में boxing हम करवाएंगे, and the Russian-led International Boxing Association is saying कि आप लोग कौन हो भाई, हम बैठे हैं, हम करवाएंगे. And as a overall outcome of all this, the Women's World Championship, which are supposed to be held in New Delhi, I think अभी दो हफ्ते भी नहीं बचे उसके लिए अभी. Those are, I mean, first probably वो jeopardy इसमें हो सकती है because you don't know whether the boxers will be competing, which kind of boxers will be coming. Already, you've got 6, 7 nations, including US, UK, boycotting the event. 8 nations. Amit tells me, "आप बोल सकते हो, you don't need to raise the fingers."
No, I didn't want to interrupt you. You were already saying something. Yeah, so 8 nations have boycotted me.
I thought you were just saying कि 8 minutes हो गए, मेरा इतना बड़ा monologue हो गया है इसमें.
वो तो मतलब that was slightly longer. I don't have fingers to point out how long your monologue has gone for, but please continue.
So basically, I just then throw the mic to you कि आप बताओ कि क्या हो रहा है boxing में and where are we at right now?
So yeah, it's the situation with boxing is even more complicated, right? As you mentioned that because of corruption at Rio, I think almost 36 of the referees and judges that were officiating matches at the Rio Olympics have been found to be guilty, to be found doing dubious stuff, which is why I think, which is where a lot of IBAs, and back then it was known as AIBA, they've decided, one of the things that they've decided to change is their name, which doesn't solve a lot, but then sure, here we are. So yeah, they've changed their name, they've tried to change their precedent. None of that has helped matters much. During the Tokyo Olympics, the IOC was so angry with them that they said that, you are not going to be hosting the boxing events at the Tokyo Olympics itself. And it took over. The same they've said about the Paris Olympics, that IBA will not be organizing the boxing events, which is rare. And just to bring a little bit of a historical perspective, exactly 100 years ago, when the 1924 Olympics were happening in Paris, that was the first time IOC had actually allowed all these federations to organize their own programs, organize their own contests. 100 years down the line, boxing is the only sport that they are taking all those rights away from. Wow. Because it is such a poorly managed, allegedly poorly managed.
It is poorly managed. I mean, we can't, अगर जो मतलब हम normal देखे कि if हम बैठे बैठे बता नहीं सकते कि कौन जीत रहा है वो bout, then I don't think that sport, it clearly requires some cleaning up.
Absolutely. So I think they even, just as an aside, the sidebar to my sidebar, boxing at some point last year, I think they tried to resolve these issues of refereeing and officiating by trying to put sensor wala mouth guards in boxers' faces, which can, tell how hard a boxer has been punched. Clearly, that's gone nowhere, because after that one initial test, we have not seen it at any other competition. That aside, alag, just wanted to come back to the topic. At the Paris Olympics, the IOC has clearly told IBA that, you can't organize the boxing event, and you will not even be allowed to organize the qualification for Paris Olympics. IBA, as you said, that has decided कि नहीं हम करेंगे, and they've designated the World Championships in Delhi as the first big. They've actually called it one of the main competitions for qualification, which is going to get a little complicated, because when the Indian Express reached out to the IOC for a comment, the IOC was vehement, and a spokesperson from the IOC told us that I don't know what. Matlab, basically, they've said that IBA has been suspended. Their suspension remains to date. So whatever it is that you want to believe, whatever it is that parallel universe that the IBA wants to create for itself, that is upon them.
Basically, IBA can't force itself into the IOC's party. I guess that's what it will mean eventually. But boxing एक example हो गया. Just to kind of, I think we are running out of time already. Just to sum this up, the next big problem that we could face is another 6 months down the line जब भी Asian Games आएगा, because as bizarre the things are these days, Russia, जो अब तक यूरोप के हिस्से से पार्ट करता था, has now suddenly looking at other ways to kind of compete, stay relevant in the international sporting arena. So you'll see a Russian under 17 women's football team competing in the South Asian Football Championship in March. And similarly, you could end up seeing up to 500 Russian and Belarusian athletes competing in the Asian Games, which will be held in China later this year. This, of course, after IOC floated कि हम Russians को as neutrals allow करेंगे, and then the Olympic Council of Asia said कि अच्छा ठीक है, आप एशिया आ जाओ, हमारे चैंपियनशिप्स में compete करना. अभी अगर जो यार एक स्पोर्ट को लेकर इतना बड़ा ओपिनियन इसमें जनरेट हो रहा है, द वर्ल्ड इज डिवाइडेड ओवर बॉक्सिंग राइट नाउ. आई कांट इमेजिन व्हाट विल हैपन इफ an entire Russian contingent comes to Asian Games, how that will impact. Right now, we know for a fact कि Russian athletes in wrestling, diving, what was the other sport? Gymnastics. ये तीन स्पोर्ट में Russians are claiming कि they have been invited to compete at the Asian Games, and there are talks कि modern pentathlon में भी उन्हें invite किया जाएगा. अमित, यार एशियन गेम्स एग्जैक्टली क्या रहेगा if Russians are involved in it?
I don't know, the Asian Plus Games, because whoever wants to come in can just buy an entry into the Asian Games, which kind of defeats the purpose of it being the Asian Games. I know that there is always this talk about what is the point of the Commonwealth Games anymore? Are they relevant? Will the Asian Games, Mir, according to you, do you think the Asian Games will be relevant once there is, maybe someday you will have Australia also come in and compete?
But Australia was supposed to compete at these games as invitees. Now, we had spoken to the president of the acting president of the Asian Olympic Council, Randhir Singh, and he told us कि यार देखो, अगर जो Russians आ भी रहे हैं तो ऐसा नहीं होगा कि सारे गोल्ड मेडल्स उन्हें मिल जाएंगे. So if a Russian athlete wins a gold medal, the next best athlete, the person जो final में हार जाते हैं या second finish करते हैं, they'll also get a gold medal if he's an Asian.
That's exactly how a sport should be organized.
It will enhance the level of competition at the Asian Games.
Doesn't it kind of also make it slightly murkier? What kind of school ground rules are there that everybody who comes takes home a medal, you know? Yeah. It kind of just makes it stranger to watch. Like, either you invite them and give them like full full rights, like you give them gold, you give them quotas, whatever, or you don't invite them at all. You can't have these piecemeal solutions.
Yeah, of course, you need to have uniformity, and I shudder to think क्या होगा अगर जो, for example, Russia का football team is invited at the Asian Games or to compete at the Asian continental tournaments, because Russia is damn good at football, as we all know, and Asian Games, for example, is a Olympic qualifier for football. The team that wins a gold medal qualifies for the Olympics. Similarly, if Russia starts competing in the Asian Football Confederation, that will lead into an Asian quota for the World Cups. इसमें तो मतलब debate काफी endless है, but it's just this bizarre scenario that we are looking at right now, जहाँ पर I don't know what's the end game here. I can't see the end game unless either Russia pulls out of Ukraine or there is some solution brokered at a sporting level. I don't know. I mean, it's too big an issue globally to be resolved just like this. But at a sporting level, I don't know what the solution for this is right now.
I don't think there is one. I think every domino that is falling is kind of making the issue slightly more complicated than it was before, rather than easing things. I mean, just think about the ridiculousness of it all. Russia is coming and competing at the Asian Games. Why? Because obviously you can't compete with maybe Ukrainians or other Europeans.
Basically, Europe is not inviting them anywhere. They're not welcome.
So then what happens when they actually qualify for the Olympics and go to the Olympics? Then how are you going to... I mean, what happens at the Olympics if a Ukrainian and a Russian come face to face and have to compete against each other for a medal?
Like happened in Chennai, by the way, just
Very
at the Chennai Open tennis just last week. There was a Ukrainian versus Russian, and it was a very feisty affair, which ended with both players not shaking their hands at the end of it. So it's going to be ugly. I don't know.
It's also very COVID appropriate behavior, to be fair.
Well, let's not get into COVID right now, of all places, since the Asian Games are happening in China. But I think, yeah, we are running out of time for today. देखो यार, इसमें I don't know, after half an hour of this discussion, आप कितने wiser इसमें से बाहर निकले हो, because we don't have answers to many of the questions. But that's the situation right now. काफी confusion है, काफी controversy है, and confusion का जवाब तो मुझे पता नहीं हम आपको दे पाएंगे या नहीं, but controversies हम आपके लिए लाते रहेंगे. So yeah, just keep listening to Game Time every Saturday. We'll be back next week, and thank you for listening today. Thank you, Amit, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Mihir, for hosting.
You were listening to Express Sports by the Indian Express. This week's show was edited and mixed by Abhishek Kumar and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.